the promise of being able to communicate in such a broad platform like the internet locally was completely transformed. It was completely transformed during this pandemic because you saw the biggest of brands, the most national and international of brands, suddenly figuring out how to hyper-local target people. Why? Because every region had different rules and regulations and openings and closings. So if you're saying to me, what would be that thought? It would be, well, take that and run with it. Because now we did see, small little markets suddenly build Shopify engines so that people could do online ordering and picking up versus answering the phone and just doing it by email.
The following is brought to you by Thryv, the end-to-end client experience platform that helps you get the job, manage the job, and get credit.
Hey, this is Gordon Henry at Winning on Main Street, and this week you get to meet Mitch Joel. Mitch is a dynamo. He's an entrepreneur, digital marketer, writer, speaker, producer. He runs something called 6 Pixels Group, a company that creates content on brands, consumers, and technology. Author of bestseller, a book called 6 Pixels of Separation, and also a podcast by that name. A second book called Control Alt Delete, which was named the best business book by Amazon. Also called a leading visionary by Strategy Magazine. And Mitch ran Twist Image, a digital marketing agency that he sold to WPP, one of the largest agencies in the world. He also hosts Groove, the No Trouble podcast, where he's building the largest oral history of electric bass players in the world. Wow. And one more cool thing before we get started, Mitch's first professional job, this is according to the history, was interviewing Tommy Lee from Motley Crue. Definitely got to get into that one. Welcome, Mitch.
Nice to meet you, Gordon. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, great to have you. So much to discuss. I really want to get into this topic of content. That's kind of like a big thing you do. And it seems to me that content is so important on the internet for many reasons, getting found, having people find out who you are on the internet. And yet, for big companies, they have teams of marketers and writers and people who think about this stuff all day long. But for our audience, small businesses, plumbers, dentists, roofers, how can they compete in this age of content creation when they're busy just running the business?
It's an amazing question. And if I'm going to be transparent, and I will be with you, when I started my blog, which was in about 2003, so it was a couple of years back, which still goes to this day, I was the president of a very small business. There was just a handful of people really, but it became abundantly clear to me that I had both an interest from having a background in journalism and in editing and creating and publishing content, that was going to be an easier way for me to build and sell in terms of our customers, the business, by providing some level of thought leadership through the content creation. I also had a little background in radio, so I was really comfortable adding on the podcast a couple of years after that. So when people say to me, well, you had an agency and you did all this stuff and you wrote books and you spoke, every ounce of that was 100% in terms of the content creation, me. I mean, I still am to this day, 20 plus years later. No one touches my content, my Twitter feed, my podcast, my blog, my radio stuff, all the preparation, but me. And the reason is because I don't look at it as another job. I look at it as the job. My job is to try to get as many customers as possible. So back in the agency days, that was large national, multinational brands who needed ongoing digital marketing services. And then when I left and sold the business, it became people who want to hire me to speak, who might want me to invest in their company, who might want me to advise their company. And now I'm working on another startup, which has attachments to it, but I just see it primarily as being job one. And so even in the end, when this company that I had built and sold and amalgamated into another unified agency, and we were 3,000 people in 30 countries, it was still only me, Gordon. It's just me. Every week trying to figure out who would be the guest on my show, what I should tweet about, where do I spend my energy? And I'm going to spin this into value for anybody who's watching or listening to this, which is I predefined where I'm going to put my energy. So I recognized really early on that I have basically 3 areas. One is long form, I actually like creating longer form articles or conversations like the one we're having. And two is I think, or I know I do it best in writing text or in audio. And so for me, I was able to narrow it down where I'm not being overwhelmed by all the platforms and not being overwhelmed by all the channels, but really focusing on text or audio in a long form way, which again gives me the blog, it gives me opportunities to write for trade publications and the podcast. And at the same time, I chose my real pinpointed area of expertise. So at the time, it was really the intersection of brands, consumers, and technology. And having that, with the bullseye being marketing at the time, now I'm more in the innovation world, but that's where I was. So I could look at anything. If you look at the news now, we have, let's say, the Facebook whistleblower. So that's news and everyone's talking about it. But I would look at it and say, what's the angle in terms of brands, the way that they use technology and the relationship with consumers, or how consumers are using technology to interact with brands? And if I can't find an arc in that, I'm not going to write about it or create. So it's that focus on knowing what style you can create, the ways in which you want to do it, and then where you're best able to create it that allowed me to do it basically on my own. Okay. Long way to answer a short question. Sorry.
So as a small business owner, you really have to accept that content is part of your job. It's not something you delegate out or just ignore. You got to do it. And maybe I'm interpreting what you're saying. You should find ways that it's comfortable for you. Maybe video, maybe podcast, maybe writing long form, short, but find a way you can create information about your business.
Well, I would take it a step further. I would say don't do it if you don't have the desire or interest in doing it. It was easy for me because I love to write and I love to have conversations like this. If you look at the world of text, images, audio, video, long form, short form, live, pre-recorded, and none of that gets you excited, or you have no skill or ability to it, then I would definitely say, look to those who do. They might be within your organization. They might be hireable. They might be freelancer based, but find somebody who has the skill and desire and interest to find these interesting stories that you have. And I know people think, well, I'm just a dentist. There's interesting stories. I mean, I chipped I haven't had any dental problems. I chipped a filling, and I'm find myself Googling and YouTubing all these dentists and what they do. And trust me, if somebody is an interesting individual, I'm more inclined to follow or listen to their advice. And there are stories to tell. And every day there are new customers. There are customers who maybe couldn't afford you or engage with you at the time they initially found out about you. There's existing customers. I mean, we could look at all three of those independently and find a myriad of ways in which we could probably better connect to them using the power of telling better stories versus this constant idea of having to slam them with ads and offers and things like that. Not negating that. I think there's a balance between your direct response challenge of getting new customers or getting people to enact or engaged on a piece of advertising or marketing, but there's also a story to tell, and both support one another. But in this digital world where it's so easy to buy localized or hyper localized advertising, we tend to lean more towards the direct response. And I guess if you took dentists or cosmetic surgeons or whomever locally, my guess is the division between storytelling and direct response is probably closer to 80 to 90% direct response than it is 50-50 to having a healthy balance between the two.
Yep. I want to talk about this. You talk a lot about being connected. Your book was 6 Pixels of Separation. Everyone is connected. Connect your business to everyone. Now, as a small business, maybe I can't connect to everyone the way Google or Facebook or Uber can, but I certainly could think about connecting to the people in my community or my immediate area. Do you have recommendations about how a business should connect, should get connected so they know who the people in their area are?
Well, one is I'll throw a correction to the premise. I think we are intrinsically connected to everybody. We used to live in a world of 6 degrees of separation. We had the joke of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. but the internet in and of itself made us intrinsically connected. And the truth of the matter is that if I choose a best-selling author or someone who's done something really interesting in business to have on my podcast, I usually don't call Gordon and go, hey, do you know someone who knows? I'm directly connected to them. Now, the way in which I think you're saying it is, Is that my discernible audience? No, clearly the entire internet, the population of the earth, is not my discernible audience. But if you're working in a local community and the discernible audience is the entire community, I would argue that you are intrinsically, because of technology, connected to the over majority of them, especially since COVID-19. Many people had, these ideas that you weren't reaching younger people or older people. And I think we all saw through the pandemic that we were sliding iPads under the doors of our eldest of elderly to be able to do FaceTime with them or help them online order. And we had our youngest of kids suddenly digitized, hopefully for school or for online learning in some way, shape, or form. So when we talk about local, I would actually say that the promise of being able to communicate in such a broad platform like the internet locally was completely transformed. It was completely transformed during this pandemic because you saw the biggest of brands, the most national and international of brands, suddenly figuring out how to hyper local target people. Why? Because every region had different rules and regulations and openings and closings. So if you're saying to me, what would be that thought? It would be, we'll take that and run with it. Because now we did see, small little markets suddenly build Shopify engines so that people could do online ordering and picking up versus answering the phone and just doing it by email. We saw every business that you may have been skeptical of in terms of their ability to leverage digital to really connect to an audience profoundly change and find that audience. And so if you're local and small-ish, and by the way, I've ran many small businesses in my time, I could tell you that the real job is to build that connection. Now, is that connection a newsletter? Is it a video? Is it a video on YouTube? Is it TikTok? Is it Instagram? I mean, I don't know about you, but I will often just watch TikTok and I can't believe how hyper localized the content is to where I live. And I live in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. So the province of Quebec, which would be like state for you, is 8 million. The city of Montreal, million-ish. So not small, but not by any means massive. And yet I'm seeing this Chinese-based social media platform be able to serve to me, sometimes 50, maybe even more % of it being completely local to my region. Right. So the opportunities are abound. I think the only thing that stops us is our skepticism of it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, your dentist example comes to mind. I think when people are in the market or thinking about being in the market for, dental work, or you mentioned cosmetic or roofing or whatever the case may be, they suddenly become intensely interested and they do want to know. And suddenly that local business has a lot to say to them. They really do want to understand how that process is conducted.
But let's say they have nothing to say to them. So here locally, I actually live in a suburb of Montreal that's very small, under 20,000 people live in this area. And there are 3 Facebook groups for this area. And every day someone says, I need a roofer. I need a dentist. What's the best place to get a great taco? And to watch the comments, one, in an amazing way, a community coming together to help one another when you don't really know each other is an amazing thing. And then for me, being the person I am, looking to see who gets referred and how well they're referred and what it means. And then let's go on the dentist model, then being able to go to something like, we have a Rate My MD. I don't know if you have it where you are, but then being able to see where that dentist ranks, both in the city, in the state, in the area you live, and then being able to see the other dentists and looking at the comments and seeing people, none of this has any intervention by the actual dentist or business.
Right.
So my argument might be, why? How amazing would it be to be in those private Facebook groups because you're a citizen, you're part of that community, and to actively raise your hand and go, I'm here. And by the way, I'm going to tag 3 or 4 people who are in this group who are my customer and trust me. I would probably be most inclined to go to that person. Instead, I'm kind of looking at the referrals and then looking to see their profiles and go, are we similar? Do we have those things? Like, would I believe your referral? So that factor plays so heavily into small businesses. And I don't even know if they're aware of it. They're worried about, do we have an e-newsletter? Are we doing video? Are we doing digital ads? But you're not actually active within these communities that are very vibrant and powerful.
Yeah. You talk a lot about the post-COVID world in your speeches, and I'm seeing you on the internet. which is a world we're, of course, all eager to discover. So what's there when we get there? How do you think particularly small businesses will be feeling, acting, 6, 12, 18 months from now when things lift?
Well, lift is, I don't know if they will. I mean, I'll frame it in terms of what happened. What happened was we had a global pandemic that did things to businesses, small, medium, and large, and public markets that I would have never been able to guess. And I consider myself fairly intelligent. I could not believe businesses that I thought would be extremely successful collapsed, and businesses that I would think would be dead completely thrived. A great example would be selling pools. Global pandemic happens, people are losing their jobs, and yet you can't get somebody to install a pool. You think that's the last thing people are buying. And yet there were certain dynamics of it that validate why that would happen.
Yep.
So there was that aspect of it. The second aspect of it was the complete reality of a world that I've been yelling about for 2 decades, digitization. And that's why I call it the Great Compression. I don't like to refer to it as a global pandemic or COVID-19 or the Great Depression. So I use this term, the Great Compression, that all of the things we knew were going to happen because of digitization happened within a very compressed amount of time, and it changed business models and consumer behavior. So when we think about what are we looking out to, we can look at where we are. Where are we? We are in a very strange K-shaped recovery, one that has some people doing exceptionally well and some doing really, really badly. And the same with businesses doing really, really well and really, really badly. We are in this moment that they're calling, especially in the US, this great resignation, 25 million jobs. Up here in Canada, we had better news as we recorded today that we had full recovery in terms of jobs and unemployment, but that doesn't mean anything. What it all means is it's going to be extremely lumpy. Lumpy isn't a good word. And I think lumpy is going to be a 3 to 5 year window of real toughness. And I'm sorry to be the bearer of what I think might be bad news. And I'm not usually someone to be pessimistic. I just don't see how so much wealth could have been built over this pandemic. And then the net result in terms of where people really are at, whatever sense of normalcy comes back in terms of buying power, supply chain. I don't know if you've hopped on a plane yet, but finding selection of flights, the ability for me to get somewhere is both very, very hard and very, very expensive. It's going to be problematic. And so we like to use the word interest as a thing. But I would just say in a more simple way, it's going to be a lot less people, and we're going to be paying a lot more for things, which in a world that already had a lot of gaps between the haves and the have-nots can only get worse. And so when you think about your small business, I don't think I would look at this moment as we're going to get back to normal, because I don't think we really know from an employment standpoint and how people shifted and where they went, and did they move out of the city, did they come to the city, all that sort of nonsense and craziness. I don't know how it's going to pan out. And so F. Scott Fitzgerald has this very famous quote about holding 2 opposing forces in your brain at the same time, and that's the sign of a true intelligence. I would argue the same thing, that if I were a small business, every tactic and strategy that I thought to deploy, I would lean it up against this idea of, is it forever changed, or are we going to go back to the way it was? And if it doesn't correlate to both, I might rethink it, because you're placing a bet in a world where I don't really have confidence in my own decision-making. So I say that and end with, I could be completely wrong, because this whole thing has proven me completely wrong.
Yeah, interesting. I want to switch gears a little bit. You built and eventually sold your Twist image agency to WPP. And many of the small businesses out there, small business people, their goal is eventually to sell a business as well. For many people, that's the reason you go into business, thinking long-term, I'm going to sell it. As you look back, can you say what were the keys to building a business that was successful enough to sell to one of the major agencies in the world?
Yeah, I mean, first is I had 3 incredible business partners, and to sit here, 20 years later and still, one, be in business with one of them, but still consider the other 2 close friends, and having been through the foxhole, as people who have partners know, to be that much in love with each other still is kind of a special thing. And so I caveat that because it's unique. Most business partners don't make it, they fight, they can't get along. There's that. The next philosophy is, what are you building for? Now, to me, what I've learned through the pandemic is there is a difference between an entrepreneur and somebody who's self-employed. there is a difference between somebody who is building a business and somebody who wants to run a small business. And the first step is acknowledging what it is. I mean, you could start very simplistically and say, I'm just trying to build a small business where I could make X amount of money and live off of it. And, every year grow a little bit. And that's great. You could be in the middle of a small business and say to yourself, I want to be able to scale this so that it has global appeal and there's no reason why any limit is possible. So philosophically, you first have to understand that the four of us really felt that the business we were building, which was a digital marketing agency in the early 2000s, had the ability to scale to be global. So if you're thinking globally, one of the business partners had been part of a global advertising network, understood the both financial and corporate ways in which they operate and actually earn money. And by that, we were able to build a business that had both the financial structure and corporate backbone into it that would allow it to scale and, should the moment come, be ready to be acquired. So in a strange way, we were always running it with this mindset of that accounting, real purpose, that corporate purpose. And I'm sure we have employees who left who might even say that to the detriment of the culture and the brand. And I would understand that, but it's a tough business. It's a nickels and dime business. And it's a business where you're squeezing margins and trying to get more margins in a world where everyone's trying to squeeze those margins. And it's very tough and it's very competitive, very hard to be a differentiator, which goes back to the content marketing engine.
Yeah.
So if you look at it from day one, it doesn't come as a surprise. We never claimed culturally to be fiercely independent or this is always going to be a small business. Our appetite was very large. And maybe it was surprising to some employees once they realized it and came in. And so they had to either move on or adjust. But to the four of us, it was very clear. We will be as small as we have to be in a world where we can be as big as we want to be. Now that has nothing to do with anything other than what are you trying to accomplish? I'm sure there are many small business owners who are listening or watching this thinking, ugh, like I want to, close the door at 5, have my night with my family and just know that like it's my schedule, my life, my income. I love that. It just wasn't where we were at.
Right, for sure. This is great. We're going to be back in just 30 seconds with more from Mitch Joel after we hear a word from our sponsor.
This episode of Winning on Main Street is brought to you by Thryv, the end-to-end client experience platform that includes everything small business owners need to meet their customers' expectations. Thryv's award-winning and fully mobile interface delivers technology previously reserved for big business to the fingertips of small business owners nationwide. Thryv's built specifically for small business, but there's nothing small about what it can do. Thryv handles your entire customer experience, helping business owners reach more customers, stay organized, get paid faster, and generate online reviews, all from a single device or screen. To learn more about Thryv, visit winningonmainstreet.com and click on Get a Demo. When it comes to software to run your business, there's no comparison. Check out Thryv today.
Back with Mitch Joel. Mitch, you're quite involved in the small business community through your writing at Inc. magazine, and I know you've been involved as an advisor to HubSpot's Inbound conference, one of the big small business conferences. What have you learned about small business through your work with Inc., and particularly curious about HubSpot?
Yeah, I mean, in full transparency, those are very, very minor things in my world. I don't even know what I've contributed to Inc. Maybe a couple of quotes and maybe an article here and there. It's been, I contribute to quite a few places, and HubSpot really was just an ability to help make introductions for what was being built at the time as an advisory board for that event. So, yeah, it was more of a what would be the word? It was ceremonial more than it was nose and hands in. But that doesn't preclude the fact that, I was running small businesses. I had many clients who are part of small businesses. I'm currently involved in 2 small businesses. And again, I think it goes a little bit back to that realization that some small businesses are happy being small. And again, I would have to say that John Jantz is probably the person who really hit it on the head for me, Because when we first started being friends again in the early 2000s, in my brain, because philosophically, I'm like, well, we're small because we're small now. We're going to be global. He was constantly able to reframe me back to some people want to be small. And what are you talking? Why would you want to be small? Why wouldn't you want as many clients, as much money? And he was really the one who illuminated it more to me, that philosophy of what it means. And I think it aligns really well with the world we're in now. I really do believe that seeing people be extremely bespoke in the work that they do, bring a certain métier to it, that real artisanal appreciation for the work is something really special. And it's also something that it seems customers really connect to, which is why you have things like, bespoke soap companies and things like Etsy and other platforms like that. So that's really the main way in which I'm always looking in terms of when I'm creating my content and also when I'm distributing it, like who is the audience? And I truly believe that the role I have is to just create content that helps you be better. So again, I used to publish magazines, not just write for them. And again, I like telling stories or analogies, using analogies. And the analogy would be, I don't want to be on the cover of the magazine. I want to be the person who writes the cover story. So I want to be able to create stuff that, again, small, medium, large, B2B, B2C, not-for-profit, trade associations could read and take something from. And no matter what the conversation is, if it's a best-selling author, an economist, a thinker, it doesn't really matter to me.
We have just a fairly short period of time left, and I want to get to a couple of questions about you personally, because you've had such an amazing journey. You speak, I think, all over the world to audiences big and small, and you have been described by many as having a very easygoing presentation style. You seem very comfortable on stage. I've heard a quote. They say 2/3 of the people in the world would rather die than get on stage and talk to a large audience. Right. So for you, it's easy. What allows you to speak to people, large audiences, so comfortably?
Well, thank you, but I'm nervous. It is the duck analogy. It's floating, but underneath the legs are going like this. I'm actually a really nervous speaker. I've got friends they just don't get anxiety at all about it. And I'm always like, how's that possible? It's a very inhumane act, isn't it? To get up there and speak to a group. And over the years, it's been a lot of work and continues to be work to really think about, why am I there? And ultimately, the reason I'm there is to help people in the audience be better when they leave than before they came in. And how do I do that? Well, I do that by showing them a world that revolves around, back to that content triangle, around businesses, consumers, and technology, and how it changes consumer behavior. And so I almost absolve myself of the stress by knowing that I'm just a conduit of this information that I'm trying to bring to them. And then the truth of the matter is most people are nervous or anxious because they just don't know their content. What I've learned over the years, and as I get older, and I've been doing this for close to 15 years, and I do 50 odd speaking events a year, is my anxiety is usually just about not wanting to let down my speaking bureau, the client, the event organizer. I don't want to be the hassle in 2 very complex and busy days. So I get anxiety from that. Hope the flight isn't delayed. I hope I don't get kidney stones. I hope whatever it might be. I don't want to be the problem. And that's just a personal thing I deal with. But from a content perspective, the reason I'm more comfortable on stage is because I really know and believe in the content. And that's work. I mean, it is work in the sense of, like, in the same sense of way a stand-up comedian goes out every night and tries out jokes. I'm like, we don't have that. I don't have that opportunity. I get on stage, and if I have something new to say, I got to hope it works out because the client is paying and I don't want to let them down. And so it's a very different dynamic where you have larger gaps in between the moments. But I will say that professionally, and I've been working since the late 80s, that if you said to me, like, what's the one skill that you think really separates others from others, it would be the ability to stand up and cogently communicate a message in a way in which an audience wants to hear it. And with that, I would say there's no doubt that I've managed to get to a point where I can do that well. And I don't take that skill for granted. I think it's a very tough skill to learn.
So music has been a big part of your life and career. You, as I mentioned before, host a podcast called Groove the No Trouble podcast. So you're obviously got a lot of interest there. And you, as I mentioned at the top of the show, you had this interesting interview at the beginning of your career with Tommy Lee of Motley Crue. How did that come about?
It's a long story, but again, going back to that magazine cover, I would look at the cover of rock magazines and not really care that it was Tommy Lee or Metallica or U2. I'd want to know, how did that person get to speak to them and hang out and hear those stories? And because I enjoyed writing, there was just this natural magnet I had to, like, who are these people? And by digging through and finding some locally, I was able to get connected into at the time, it was a teen magazine that led to these types of interviews and platforms, which led me to ask other larger magazines or newspapers if I could write for them. And it became a place where I started actually publishing my own magazines. Now, when I do it, when I'm doing this base podcast, it really is more for fun. I wanted to, dip a little pinky toe back into the music business a little bit. And this is a great way with a monthly show to speak about an instrument that I love, with musicians whose stories really haven't been told in the way in which I'm trying to tell them. And it gives me what's more fun than going to a concert? Going to a concert for free and going backstage. That's a lot more fun. And so, being someone who's been able to do that and make friends with a lot of agents and artists and managers has been just an amazing, fun experience. It makes for a great evening of stories.
Yeah, fantastic. If I understand correctly, your 6 Pixels of Separation podcast, you're in episode something like 900. Which
I'm getting close to 800, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so by my count, that means you've been doing it for well over a decade, maybe almost 2 decades or a decade and a half. Most of us didn't even have smartphones in 2005. How did you distribute the thing?
So, it's the same technology. It's this RSS feed. And again, iTunes, back then Apple Music or Apple Podcast was what it was. You could also distribute it on your physical blog or website. But no, for years, we would talk about how the popularity of podcasting would only really tip when it was easier to actually be able to get them and find them and grab them. And look, and I'm not sure I really do. I've never missed an episode. I've never missed a Sunday and it's every week. So I believe it's probably the longest running business podcast, probably in the history of podcasts. I don't know, but I would assume it is.
Yeah, incredible. So we just have a minute or two left. You're such a busy guy. You've been speaking, writing, blogging, podcasting, all these things. You're a dynamo. Do you have any time for personal life or fun? And if you do, what do you do for fun?
I've got a great family. Very, very happy about my family. Got great friends. I love to read. I love to go for walks with friends, or I like to go for walks alone. I like to meet people for coffee. I love going to concerts, as we talked about. I have a lot of hobbies. I like to collect comic books, which I do. And I make sure that I just become part of those types of communities so that the conversations are rich. I believe that ultimately what I like to do for fun is to collect conversations. And so I do that, whether it's with my kids or my partner, or whether it's with family members or friends. I'm not always the most talkative because I talk for a living, but that is how I see it. And I have plenty of time to do all the things I want to do.
That's great. Well, Mitch, we've really enjoyed having you on this show, and I want to thank you for stopping by.
Great connecting, Gordon. Thank you for asking me to be here. Thank you.
And if our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach out to Mitch Joel?
Yeah, they're both intrinsically connected. You can go to mitchjoel.com or 6pixels.com.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks for stopping by. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please give us a 5-star review and tell a friend or colleague to subscribe. We would really appreciate it. Until next time, make it a great week.